Not really sure how to start this video, but today I'd like to talk about a vocalist. Perhaps the greatest vocalist of all time, but regardless, a vocalist that's voice has touched my heart and even my soul. And since you clicked on this video, I imagine yours as well. The story of Layne Staley is a tragic one, but a story that should be told nonetheless. Today, I would like to tell you the heartbreakingly short story of Layne Staley's life, from the very beginning to the bitter end. Layne, born Layne Rutherford Staley, was born on August 22nd, 1967 in beautiful is in quotes in this script, Bellevue, Washington. His parents were Philip Blair Staley and Nancy Elizabeth Staley. Layne hated his middle name because Rutherford resulted him in being ridiculed by the scholars at his middle school, so he had it legally changed to Tommy, his namesake being Tommy Lee, the drummer of Motley Crue. His family had always involved him in the music scene. At just 3 years old, he was in an unnamed rhythm group. At 9 years old, he wrote in a book his dream, and that dream was to be a singer. Layne was destined for this life. At 7 years old, Layne's parents got a divorce, which is always a lot of fun for a 7-year-old child, and ended up being raised by his mother and his stepfather, Jim Elmer. It seems he was close with his stepfather, as he had his name legally changed for the second time in 7 years to Layne Elmer, after his stepfather. Layne grew up in an incredibly religious environment, and arrived at the same conclusion a lot of brainwashed children arrive at. He had this to say about religion. I have a fascination with how brainwashed people get with religion and how they'll give up their money, their time, and their whole life for a cause that they're sure is right, but I'm sure is wrong. I think there's a lot of people who are scared of life and living, and they want to make sure they get to heaven or whatever. I try to stay away from it as much as I can. I was raised in the church until I was 16, and I've disagreed with their beliefs for as long as I can remember. So when I had the choice, I chose not to believe in anything apart from myself. Layne learned about music predominantly through his parents' music collection, including Black Sabbath, who he stated was his first influence, Deep Purple, Anthrax, Judas Priest, a lot of the bands from that time. He picked up the drums at, well, I guess you don't really pick up the drums. I was thinking like picked up the guitar, but you can't actually pick up a drum set. He picked up the drumsticks at 12 years old and played in a couple high school bands, but it wasn't until 1984 that Layne found his band. In 1984, he joined a group of high school friends in a band called Sleaze, where he dropped the drumsticks and picked up the microphone. In 85, the band performed in a low-budget movie called Father Rock from Seattle's public access channel. In 86, Sleaze decided a name change was in order. Sleaze was henceforth known as the legendary, the iconic, the Kings of Grunge, Alice in Chains, where they began dressing in drag and playing speed metal. I'm just reading an article, man. I don't know. Their drag and speed metal ambitions may have died, but Layne would soon meet his best friend and kick off not only his legendary music career, but simultaneously his own demise. The year was 1987, and Layne met his best friend-to-be and one of my favorite guitarists of all time, the great Jerry Cantrell. They met at a party while Layne worked at Music Bank rehearsal studios. A few months prior to their meeting, Jerry had seen Alice in Chains performing and was very impressed with Layne's vocal talent. Jerry said, "I knew that voice was the guy I wanted to be playing with. It sounded like it came out of a 350-pound biker rather than skinny little Layne. I considered his voice to be my voice." He knew right from the jump that Layne had something. Jerry found himself homeless at the time after being kicked out of his parents' house, so he moved in with Layne at the Music Bank. They lived together there for a little over a year and quickly became great friends. It was then the iconic Alice in Chains disbanded and left Layne without a band. He joined an unnamed funk band, which had 2 holes in the band. One at the vocalist position that Layne would take, and they needed a guitarist. Layne asked his new friend Jerry to join the band as a sideman, which pretty much just means temporarily. And Jerry agreed, but he had one condition. A condition that would completely and irreversibly change the lives of everybody there. All Layne had to do was join Jerry's band. A band consisting of a couple no-name musicians at the time, being drummer Sean Kinney and bassist Mike Starr. They coerced Layne into joining the band by auditioning terrible lead singers in front of him. He resisted, but the final straw was a male stripper's audition that led to him joining the band. Eventually, the aforementioned funk band broke up, and Jerry's project became Layne's main focus. The band had a couple names. They began with a classy one, Fuck. They didn't really like that one much. They tried Diamond Lie, which was one of Jerry's previous band names, and they stuck with that one for about 2 weeks. At the end of that second week, the band had a gig at the University of Washington. A 40-minute set for a band that's been together for 2 weeks. It wasn't easy, but they got it done with the help of a couple David Bowie covers. Man, if I had a nickel for every time a grunge band covered a David Bowie song, I would have 4 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened 4 times. Anyway, the name Diamond Lie began to spread around Seattle, but the band was still unhappy with the name. They settled on one of Layne's previous band names, this time, for sure, Alice in Chains. Local promoter Randy Hauser had seen the band at a concert and offered to pay for their demo recordings. Tragically, or perhaps hilariously, the band was unable to record these demos as the day prior, Music Bank Studio was shut down during the biggest weed raid in the history of the state of Washington. Tough break for the band, but they got the demos done at some point in '88. The demos, called the Treehouse Tapes, made their way around Seattle and arrived in the hands of music managers Kelly Curtis and Susan Silver, the managers for the at-the-time up-and-rising Soundgarden. They loved the demo and passed it up to Columbia Records, who signed the band in 1989. The band released their first studio record on August 21st of 1990, and it took the world by storm. The second single, Man in the Box, was a huge hit. The record today is now certified double platinum after selling about 2 million copies in just the US. The band toured for the next 2 years before releasing their next project, the Sap EP, in early 1992. But I'd like to stop here for just a moment. The story was going a little too well, I guess. This newfound success was, of course, a blessing for the band, but a curse for Layne and bassist Mike Starr. The two found themselves on perhaps the darkest path a human can take themselves down, the path of heroin. A lot of Facelift has some political and religious lyrics, but many of the tracks are a little easier to understand in the context of this addiction they faced. Of course, the opening track, We Die Young, perhaps being the most obvious reference, with lyrics like Take Another Hit and You Should Have Known Better. But also songs like I Can't Remember and Put You Down and It Ain't Like That. A lot of these songs are almost riding the high of this new drug they found, the peaks of heroin and how unfathomably high they are. Alice in Chains released 3 studio albums with Layne Staley. We begin with Facelift, The Rise to Fame, The Drugs with No Repercussions, and the freedom it entailed. The second studio album takes a much more somber turn. It's on this record that the consequences of this lifestyle become uncomfortably apparent, not to just Layne and the band, but even to the fans. In September of 1992, Alice in Chains released their second studio album, their most critically acclaimed album, and the band's most successful album, In Dirt. The record debuted at number 6 on the Billboard Top 200 and went quadruple platinum. It was during this tour, specifically in Brazil in 1993, while the band toured with Nirvana, that Kurt Cobain and Layne both gave Mike Starr, the bassist, shots of heroin. First Kurt and then Layne. Mike immediately collapsed after the second shot. Layne revived Mike with CPR, and he woke up to find Layne sitting by his side, inconsolably crying. This spelled the end for Mike Starr's career with the band and the addition of new bassist Mike Hines. But there's not really a story to tell there. Due to the blatant drug issues in both Layne and Mike Starr, the band stopped their Dirt tour entirely. In regards to the lyricism on this record, it's almost a little uncomfortable to read in the full context of his life. Songs like Down in a Hole so beautifully illustrate the battle Layne was trying to fight. Down in a hole and I don't know if I can be saved. A man who won't let himself be. The song Sick Man being a direct request from Layne to Jerry when he asked him to write, quote, the sickest tune, the sickest, darkest, most fucked up and heaviest thing he could write. Songs like Junkhead, which was co-written by both Layne and Jerry, and a song about drug abuse and the lack of empathy people have for them. Songs like Dirt, perhaps the darkest of any song on this record, that sounds like a man giving into his addictions, to the darkness within him, or the hauntingly dark conclusion to the fan-favorite track Would, ending with the line, if I would, could you? Posing the question, even if people had given him more help, would he even have accepted it? Would anything have changed? Heroin addiction completely destroyed his life. If he would, could you? What separates you and him? It's an incredibly tragic record masked behind some of the sickest guitar riffs I've ever heard in my life. It's when the consequences of drugs become apparent. It's when he lost control of his own life. In a way, the death of Layne Staley, many years before they buried the body. We return to 1994, a far worse year for some grunge fans, but one with a lot of new Layne Staley music. On January 25th, Jar of Flies released. It was the band's second crack at an acoustic record, and this one, if I may baselessly claim, is a much better effort. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Top 200, making it the first Alice in Chains release ever, and the first EP release to ever do so. Sadly, there was no tour for this project due to Layne's rapidly deteriorating condition. This project feels a lot like a man saying goodbye almost. With the opening track, Rotten Apple, he looks back on the first time he took heroin, as he acknowledges and perhaps realized that that was the day that he sealed his own fate. And of course the unfathomably iconic Nutshell with absolutely horrifying lyrics, like, if I can't be my own, I'd feel better dead. In essence, if he can't be his own or someone without the reliance of some drug, then he'd rather be dead. Like I said, the band failed to tour for this record at all, but Jar of Flies was not Layne's only project in 1994. At the time, it wasn't unheard of for artists to form what's known as a supergroup. A supergroup is just that. It's kind of like an all-star lineup band with members from a lot of popular groups. Audioslave comes to mind instantly, being Rage Against the Machine on almost every instrument, and Chris Cornell on the vocals. Layne had joined a group with a couple other Seattle big shots, being Mike McCready of Pearl Jam on guitar, Barrett Martin of Screaming Trees on drums, and John Baker Saunders of The Walkabouts on bass. I didn't know the last one either. It was an exceptional lineup of musicians, and the band played their first show on October 12th in 1994 in Seattle, calling themselves the Gacy Bunch. That name didn't last long, however, as a few short weeks later the band returned under the name Mad Season. Under Mad Season, the band released their sole album, and what I would only describe as a really underrated record, Above, on March 14th of 1995. While performing with Mad Season, it was becoming visually apparent that his rehabilitation efforts were in vain. His name was constantly in the news due to his deteriorating physical condition, and it was clear that these articles were taking a toll on Layne. 1995 was also the year Layne returned to Alice in Chains after his short hiatus, and also the year the band would release their final record with Layne, their self-titled album, also known as Tripod, due to the three-legged dog on the cover. This album was released on Halloween Day of 1995, and similarly to both Facelift and Jar of Flies, went double platinum. This album featured lyrics almost exclusively written by Layne, excluding track 1, Grind, track 4, Heaven Beside You, and track 12, Over Now. This record serves almost as a farewell from Layne. If Jar of Flies was a solemn and almost poetic goodbye, this album is a toe-curling and angry scream at his younger self, the self that sealed his own fate. Songs like Frogs just describe genuinely painful reflection. As a man who knows his death is near, questions how this happened, why it has to be this way, he repeats throughout the track, as he nears his own self-described expiration date. The band again failed to tour for this record, as Layne was in no state to do so. A reporter once asked Jerry how he felt about this, and he said this: "It's very frustrating, but we stuck it out. We rode the good times together, and we stuck together through the hard times. We never stabbed each other in the back and spilled our guts and did that kind of bullshit that you see happen a lot." This may have been Layne's final studio release with the band, but he had not yet reached his own expiration date. That cursed day would come 6 years later, but now without a little bit more heartbreak. Drugs worked for me for years, and now they're turning against me. Now I'm walking through hell, and this sucks. I didn't want my fans to think that heroin was cool, but then I've had fans come up to me and give me the thumbs up, telling me they're high. That's exactly what I didn't want to happen. Layne's penultimate show was perhaps his most iconic, and one of the most iconic live shows ever performed. Alice in Chains' legendary Unplugged set in New York on April 10th, 1996, served as the band's first show in over 2.5 years and simultaneously shattered and warmed the hearts of fans all around. The show is described as a man playing at his own funeral. It features a genuinely mythical rendition of Nutshell, as well as a lot of the band's other hits. It's really hard to listen to, and it's even harder to watch, as his deteriorating state was captured in perhaps its clearest quality ever. His teeth were rotting, his eyes were yellow. He looked frail. It was a man on the brink of death, and yet through it all, he went out there and delivered one of the greatest live performances I've ever seen. The band performed their final show on July 3rd, 1996 in Kansas City on a tour with Kiss. That spelled the end of Alice in Chains, but not quite the end of Layne Staley. On October 29th, 1996, Layne's life took a dramatic turn for the worst. As if his life was going too well, Demery Lara Parrott, a woman I haven't mentioned yet in this video, was Layne's fiancée for an undisclosed amount of time. Not much is known about their relationship. Anyway, October 29th marked the death of his love due to a drug-related heart condition. Immediately following her death, Layne was placed on 24-hour suicide watch. A friend of Layne was interviewed who told reporters that Layne was taking her death extremely badly and had fallen into a deep depression. Mark Lanegan, the lead singer of the Screaming Trees, was interviewed after Layne's death in 2002. He said he never recovered from Demry's death. After that, I don't think he wanted to go on. The final nail in a coffin already being lowered into the ground. In 1998, Layne was pretty much completely homebound. Very rarely was he seen. But rumors said he had contracted a disease called gangrene, which took away his ability to ingest food completely. Jerry told an interviewer that the band was still close with Layne and regularly hung out at his apartment. In June of 1998, Layne called in on a radio show where Jerry was promoting his first studio album. He called to tell him that he loved the record. His love for his brother was a constant in his life, even towards the end. In October of 1998, Layne recorded his final 2 tracks with Alice in Chains, 2 singles titled Get Born Again and Died, which were released on a box set in 1999. During the recordings of these tracks, rumors of his deterioration returned. Dirt producer Dave Jordan was quoted saying Staley weighed 80 pounds and was white as a ghost. Studio engineer Ellen Trujillo said Layne definitely didn't look like how he used to look, and said he had no teeth and atrophy in his legs. Jerry, however, refused to comment on Layne at all, as did band manager Susan Silver. Layne's final public appearance was on October 31st, 1998, when he went to one of Jerry's solo concerts in Seattle. Jerry invited him on stage, but he declined his invitation. It was here that the final picture of Layne Staley was taken. In November of 1998, Layne would record his final piece of music, a cover of Another Brick in the Wall, with another supergroup called Class of 99, consisting of members from Rage Against the Machine, Jane's Addiction, and Porno for Pyros. On July 19, 1999, Layne would join the rest of Alice in Chains unexpectedly while they discussed the release of Nothing Safe, Best of the Box, a box set they were releasing. This served as Layne's final interview and the final time the public ever heard from Layne Staley. His final 3 years are almost completely undocumented. He became even more depressed and rarely ever left his home. It's rumored that he spent his days creating art, playing video games, and, of course, doing drugs. But this undocumented period isn't quite as heartbreaking as it sounds. His mom told an interviewer that he was never far from the love of his family and friends, who filled his answering machine and mailbox with messages and letters. Just because he was isolated didn't mean we didn't have sweet moments with him. She told the interviewer that she had seen him several times in those years, seeing him for the final time around Valentine's Day of 2002, when Layne visited his sister's baby for the first and last time. Sean Kinney also commented on his final years, saying it got to a point where he'd kept himself so locked up, both physically and emotionally. I kept trying to make contact 3 times a week, like clockwork. I'd call him, but he'd never answer. Every time I was in the area, I was up in front of his place yelling for him. Even if you could get in his building, he wasn't going to open the door. You'd phone and he wouldn't answer. You couldn't just kick the door in and grab him, though there were so many times I thought about doing that. But if someone won't help themselves, what really can anyone else do? Other friends of Layne's, like Matt Fox, said if no one heard from him for weeks, it wasn't unusual. Mark Lanegan said he didn't speak to anybody as of late. It's been a few months since I talked to him, but for us to not talk for a few months is a par for the course. No one could really contact Layne. No one could speak to him. No one could see him. He was completely alone, isolated, which makes this last part all the more tragic. On April 17th, 2002, Layne's mother went to his apartment to inform him of his late fiancé's brother's passing, but there was no response. Nothing too out of the ordinary. On April 19th, 2002, Layne's accountants contacted former Alice in Chains manager Susan Silver and told her that no money had been withdrawn in 2 weeks. Completely out of the ordinary for Layne. She had someone visit his apartment who arrived to see mail left by his door. Layne's cat, Sadie, who was usually quiet, was meowing loudly at the door. Fearing something was wrong, they called the police, who discovered Layne's lifeless body. He weighed only 86 pounds at the time. His body was already partially decomposed. They could only identify him as Layne Staley due to his dental records. The autopsy revealed that he died from a mix of heroin and cocaine, and also concluded that Layne had died 2 weeks before his body was even found, on April 5th, the same day that the great Kurt Cobain had died 8 years prior. His death was not classified as a suicide, it was instead classified as an accident. After his death, the band released the following statement. It's good to be with friends and family as we struggle to deal with this immense loss and try to celebrate this immense life. We're looking for all the usual things: comfort, purpose, answers, something to hold on to, a way to let him go in peace. Mostly, we're feeling heartbroken over the death of our beautiful friend. He was a sweet man with a keen sense of humor and a deep sense of humanity. He was an amazing musician, an inspiration, and a comfort to so many. He made great music and gifted it to the world. We're proud to have known him, to be his friend, and to create music with him. For the past decade, Layne struggled greatly. We can only hope that he has at last found some peace. We love you, Layne, dearly, and we will miss you endlessly. Bassist Mike Starr says that he was the last person to ever see Layne before his death, and he did so on April 4th, the day right before. He says that Layne was very sick, but refused to call 911. They got into a big argument, and Mike stormed out of the apartment. He says Layne called out for him as he left and said, "Not like this. Don't leave like this." Mike expressed his immense regret for not calling 911 and potentially saving his friend's life, and said that Layne had threatened to sever their friendship had he done so. Mike admitted that he was high on benzodiazepines while meeting Layne and leaving his friend in his near-death state. Layne's mother responded to this story, saying that she didn't blame Mike for her son's death. She told him Layne would forgive you. He'd say, "Hey, I did this, not you." Regardless, he blamed himself for his death and kept that story a secret until 2010, when he revealed it on a celebrity rehab show. He also mentioned in this interview that Layne had attempted rehab over 14 times, but when these took place is completely unknown. Mike Starr was found dead a year later, on March 8th, 2011, due to a prescription drug overdose. A memorial was held for Layne on April 20th, 2002, which was attended by many fans and friends, including every member of Alice in Chains and Soundgarden frontman Chris Cornell. A private memorial was held on April 28th, 2002, where Chris Cornell performed the song Wild Horses by the Rolling Stones at the funeral, as well as Sand by the Lovemongers. Jerry dedicated his solo album Degradation Trip to his late friend, and also took in his cat Sadie, who passed away in 2010 at the age of 18. Following his death, his parents worked at Seattle's Therapeutic Health Services Clinic in order to create the Layne Staley Memorial Fund to help other struggling heroin addicts in the Seattle area. The life of Layne touched many other musicians as well. Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins said he had an amazing voice that had such a beautiful, sad, haunting quality about it. He was different because his heaviness was in that voice. Billy dedicated the song Bleeding the Orchid to Layne. Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam wrote a song called 42002, another song dedicated to Layne's death, as it was the day he found out. He also paid tribute to Layne in a concert on August 22nd, 2016, which would have marked Layne's 49th birthday, and dedicated the song Man of the Hour to him. To close us out here, I'd like to read one more quote from Jerry about his late friend. "Layne was responsible for giving me the confidence to become more of a singer. He'd say, 'You wrote this song. This means something to you. Sing it.' He kicked my ass out of the nest. Over the years, I continued to grow, and Layne started to play the guitar, and we inspired each other. Of course, Layne Staley was one of the greatest vocalists of all time, and of course he should be remembered as such, but it's also important to remember that he was just a man with a broken heart and a shattered soul, and a man that was able to take that broken heart and that shattered soul and share that with the world, with you and with me. He may have lost his own life, but he surely saved many in the process. Through his love with his friends and family, and through his life-changing music for the rest of the world, a man that truly changed the world with his voice."